Hi guys, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my channel. And in this video, I'm going to be telling you guys the story of a survivor. So without further ado, let's get into the video. On September 28, 1978, 15-year-old Mary Vincent stood on the side of the road somewhere near Berkeley, California. She was either traveling back from her grandfather's house or to her grandfather's house. I'm not 100% sure. I saw conflicting information, but I'm pretty sure she got homesick at her grandfather's house and started to go back home. She was waiting with two other hitchhikers, and finally a blue van did pull up. And although this van was pretty much completely empty, there weren't any back seats even, but for some reason, the driver insisted that Mary was the only one he could take, even though the other two hitchhikers could 100% fit and were going in the same direction. Now, as far as Mary's early life goes, we don't know a whole lot. We do know that she was one of 7 children with her parents in Las Vegas. Her father was a mechanic while her mother was a blackjack dealer while serving in the military. And Mary dreamed of traveling the world as a competitive dancer. However, her parents started going through a very messy divorce. She eventually ran away and started going from place to place and person to person. Some nights were spent in her current boyfriend's car in San Francisco, but he was eventually arrested for raping a teenage girl. She spent some time in her uncle's home right outside Santa Cruz. Some of her time was spent behind trash cans in unlocked cars, and she was just really struggling to have a steady place to live. So that brings us to her hitchhiking journey on that September day. The man behind the wheel of this blue van that picked Mary up was 50-year-old Lawrence Singleton. And he was overweight, he was balding, and he was a grandpa-like figure. The other hitchhikers warned her not to get in this van. They were very concerned because he clearly wanted Mary alone, and Mary just didn't really see it that way. She wanted a ride, and she just ignored their protests and got in the passenger seat anyways. He then started acting very strange. He had very weird behavior, but Mary tried ignoring that as well. For example, he had 2-gallon milk jugs that he had filled with alcohol, and he was drinking from them as he was driving. He also kept making passes at her. He would try to pull her closer to him, but she would pull away. However, she eventually settled in and fell asleep. And then when she woke up, it was pitch black outside. Then she began to panic when she realized they were not going the way she told him to go. Street signs said that they were heading towards Nevada. She then began feeling around her seat and found a random stick. She pointed it at him and demanded that he turn around. And it seemed like he listened until he had to pull off to the side for a quick bathroom break. Mary got out of the car as well and figured that she could outrun him if she wanted to. This guy was overweight. She was a young teenage girl. She had no doubt that she could outrun him. However, she realized her shoe was untied. So she bends down to untie it because she figured if she had a chance to outrun this guy, it would make sense to tie her shoe first. She was so focused on tying her shoe, she failed to realize Lawrence was coming up from behind her with a sledgehammer, and unfortunately, he knocked her out cold. When she regained consciousness, she was tied up in the back of the van completely naked, and Lawrence was standing over her and raping her over and over and over again. Her cries and pleas were ignored. She begged him to stop, and she of course told him that if he let her go, she would not tell a single soul. But of course, he didn't listen. And the only time he really stopped raping her was to sleep or to drive to a new location. He always returned to keep assaulting her. And finally, the sun eventually came up. Lawrence pulled Mary out of the van and untied her, and then he said, You want to be free, I'll set you free. And that is when he grabbed a hatchet and started hitting right below her elbow. He hit her 3 times and cut off her left arm. He then went for her right arm, which took longer because she was kicking, she was screaming, she was doing everything she could to try and stop him. But ultimately, he had the power. Her body got still as he finished, and from where she lay, she noticed he was making this weird movement across his body, and that's when she realized her severed arm was still grabbing onto his forearm. He then proceeded to throw her off a cliff. She fell 30 feet to the ground, and he just assumed that she was dead. He then climbed down, stuffed her in a drainage culvert, and fled the scene. Now, Mary was in fact alive, but barely. She had 4 broken ribs, obviously both of her arms were severed, and she was left to bleed out. She also didn't know if Lawrence was up waiting for her to come back or if he had left. So she was very scared to kind of climb out and try to get help, thinking that he might be waiting for her and finish the job. Mary was tired, she was cold, she really wanted to just go to sleep and let go, basically. But she knew that if she did not find help and turn this guy in, he would do this to somebody else, and she was not going to let that happen. Now, it is beyond insane that Mary survived, and luckily she actually had even more survival skills to help her get through this and go find help while also staying alive. So Mary stuck her amputated arms into the mud to stop the bleeding, and that is when she began to climb. It was night by the time she got to the top, but thankfully her attacker was gone. And that is when Mary remembered something her mom taught her as a kid. When she had cut her finger, she was told to put her finger over her heart. So that's when she realized she should put her arms over her head. She walked for nearly 3 miles. She finally came across 2 young men in a convertible, so she made herself very visible, stood in the road and everything. However, they did not slow down. In fact, they sped up to intentionally pass her. A little while later, she saw headlights again, and this time a truck did stop, and it happened to be a couple who took a wrong turn during their honeymoon. So they helped her into their truck and rushed her off to the hospital. She was told that she lost over half the blood in her body, and the remaining blood became toxic. She told the police every single detail she possibly could remember about her attacker. She had said that she wanted to make sure the police knew exactly who he was when they saw his face. And she also said that she described him to the police like she would have described somebody to a blind person. That's how detailed she was getting. 10 days later, a neighbor did spot him and reported him to the police, and he was arrested. However, Lawrence had a different story. He said that Mary was a drugged out call girl who was threatening that if he didn't do what she asked, she was going to hurt him. He said that 2 other hitchhikers that were with him were Mary's actual attackers, and that he was being framed for something he didn't do. But of course, nobody believed his story. Lawrence Bernard Singleton was born on July 28, 1927 in Tampa, Florida. In his young adulthood, he worked as a merchant marine, and he served and was honorably discharged. He became a sea merchant and eventually got married and had a daughter. Then he had a drinking habit that kind of became an issue, and this all started when he was stationed in Korea. His drinking problem is the reason that his first marriage ended in 1971 and his second one ended in 1976. And the second one actually ended after 2 years because he would not accept that he had an addiction. His rage and violence got worse as he drank, which was very regular for him. And this violence was mainly directed towards women in his life, and this is the reason that the relationship between him and his daughter ended. 6 months after Lawrence's arrest, Mary and her prosthetics faced him in a San Diego courtroom. Mary bravely testified against Lawrence and told the jury everything he did to her. And when Mary and Lawrence had to pass each other, he told her, and I quote, "If it's the last thing I do, I'll finish the job." On March 29, 1979, Lawrence was charged and convicted with attempted murder, rape, kidnapping, sodomy, forced oral copulation, and aggravated mayhem. You would think that would be the end, right? Like, he did something so terrible, and there's proof, and he should be locked away for life. But that wasn't the case. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison because that was the maximum sentence in California at the time. And after 8 years, he was released on parole for good behavior. However, many countries, cities, towns, etc. didn't want him near them. He was banned from lots of places. They had restraining orders. One city in particular had a petition that got over 10,000 signatures because people wanted him banned from that city. Multiple times he needed a police escort from his house because of all the protesters screaming. In April of 1988, his parole finally expired. In 1987, a singleton bill was passed, which basically meant that anybody who kind of like committed an act of torture would get a minimum of 25 years in prison. However, that bill became a law after his sentence ended, so it could not be applied to him retroactively. Mary won a $2.56 million civil judgment against him, but she couldn't collect this money because Lawrence was unemployed, he was in poor health, and he only had like $200 in his savings account. Surgeons had to take part of Mary's leg to save her right arm, and unfortunately this did end her dancing career. After this, she returned to Las Vegas. She enrolled in school, and the relationship with her parents got worse, and her friends started kind of distancing themselves from her. As for her parents, Mary said they were more interested about how they felt what happened to her than what she felt. She left home once again, and she honestly just traveled until she came across a small town in Washington where she got married and had 2 kids. Now this is when Lawrence was freed from prison, and he had stated that he was going to spend the beginning of his freedom checking out the state that Mary was known to live in. She began moving frequently. She was afraid that if she stayed in one place for too long, Lawrence was going to find her sons, her husband, just her family, and she was not going to let that happen. So she kept moving to make sure he could not find her very easily. And unfortunately, this stress, along with the imposing media, caused her marriage to fall apart. Her income was solely disability checks and court settlements. Her and the kids even lived in an unheated, abandoned Arco station at one point. Lawrence eventually moved back to Florida, where he was now going by Bill, and in 1990 he was convicted for theft twice. On February 19th, 1997, a local house painter decided to stop by a client's house to do some kind of last-minute touch-ups. This client was Lawrence. When he looked through the window, he saw Bill completely naked in the living room, standing over a motionless woman on the couch. He was covered in blood, and the witness said he just was stabbing this woman over and over and over. Roxanne Hayes was a 31-year-old mother of 3 who became a sex worker to help provide for her family. She had agreed to meet Bill at his home for $20. Starting at 2 years old, Roxanne was sexually abused by her grandfather, and supposedly a lot of people actually knew about this, but nobody came forward and said anything. And then when she was either 6 or 7, her grandfather was in her room with her and he just died. Her abusive alcoholic father also physically abused her until she was 14 years old, and that was the same year that her mother died. So Roxanne had enough and she left home. She was taken in by family friends, and in 1984 she graduated from Hillsborough High School. She didn't enjoy school academically or socially, so she didn't really see a reason to continue her education after that. And Roxanne really didn't have any friends. She would go to these parties, but nobody would want to dance with her. She smoked marijuana and she skipped school quite a bit too. After graduating, she became involved with multiple men. And one of those men were actually the father of her first child, Akiena. I think that's how you pronounce it, but correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Roxanne was eventually addicted to cocaine, and in June of 1986 she was charged with possession and sentenced to 4 years probation. However, in April of 1987 she violated that probation by being charged with prostitution. She was sentenced to 2 years house arrest, and she also violated that when she was charged with prostitution again in December of that same year. So then she was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Over the next 10 years, she'd be arrested many more times. And it got to the point where her sentences began overlapping. So she would be arrested and sentenced again before her last sentence was over. She eventually tried to get a job, and somebody who actually knew her background offered her a bookkeeping position. But shortly after she accepted this job and got started, the man came on to her. She had also applied for many fast food places, but they all asked for experience, and she had none. However, while she was at a job, she met Clifford Tyson. Clifford Tyson had just gotten divorced and was released from prison in early 1987. He served about half of a 4-year sentence for robbery, burglary, and grand theft. He supported himself as a cook in the past, and in 1988 is when he met Roxanne. She had asked him for a ride because she was tired, so he agreed and she got in. They talked, she slept, and she even talked about her daughter. And he took her to his sister's house where she kind of just stayed and slept for a few days, and things kind of just escalated from there. They had 2 sons together, Clifton in 1989 and Malachi in 1993. And Roxanne was actually serving a jail sentence when she went into labor with Clifton. So right after her delivery, she was shackled to the hospital bed. And then for Malachi, she was still in house arrest. So instead of calling any family members when she first went into labor, Clifford had to call the probation officer to make sure it was okay for her to go to the hospital and have their baby. Despite her criminal record, she was a good mom. She would read them bedtime stories, she would dress them up for Halloween, she would take them to places like Chuck E. Cheese, even if she did not have a lot of money to do so. This just meant she was on the streets more to make more money. She also went to all of her daughter's school performances. Clifford was working as a trucker for a flooring and carpet company, but he got into a bad accident and hurt his back in July of 1996. So he kind of had to stop working altogether. His left knee did need surgery, and like I said, Roxanne was the sole provider for their family now. About 100 people attended Roxanne's funeral at the end of February. Now, when the police got to the crime scene, Lawrence never denied what happened, but he had once again another version of events that did not match the witness's story. And that was basically that Roxanne wanted more money than he was going to give her, and that was agreed upon. So he fought with her over his wallet, I guess, and she picked up a knife and accidentally cut herself. Mary traveled to Florida to testify against Lauren once again because she wanted to make sure he was put away once and for all. And once again, she described the horror she was put through. She was raped. She had her arms severed. She was left for dead, and her attacker showed no remorse whatsoever. Now, during the trial, he tried telling another story. He proceeded to say that he was just a sad old man and he called Roxanne over for company, and that she tried stabbing him and then she accidentally stabbed herself 7 times somehow. Then she asked him to hold her in his arms as she died. On February 20th, 1998, Lawrence Singleton was found guilty of first-degree murder, and on April 14th, he was sentenced to death. However, while he was waiting to be executed, he died on December 28th, 2001, to cancer at 74 years old. After Roxanne's murder, Mary channeled her pain into advocacy. She would campaign for stronger protections for victims, push for reforms in the justice system, she'd speak out against lenient sentences for violent offenders, and she'd give motivational speeches to those who have gone through trauma. Mary Vincent is now Mary McGriff. She is married to Tony McGriff. She has 2 adult sons and is living in Vaughan, Washington. She's currently 61 years old. She loves using different bits and pieces of like radios and refrigerators with her prosthetics. Unfortunately, she still has nightmares occasionally, and it took her 30 years to finally be comfortable with her life after Lawrence's death. She even resented the fact that her own brothers were men for a little while, and overall, she still has a lot of trouble trusting people. Obviously, it's gotten a lot better, but that's kind of something you just never fully get over. She also doesn't do public speeches anymore because there was one time, I guess, a younger boy screamed at her and was super nasty to her during one of her speeches, and so she kind of just cut them off altogether after that. Now let's talk about her prosthetics for a minute. So she uses part of a mechanism from an old slot machine. It's like the lever that goes up and down, and it helps give her flexibility. A disc from the bottom of a dishwasher helps her hands to rotate, and she also used parts from bikes and stereos. Obviously, she dealt with severe depression, insomnia, anxiety, a lot of different conditions that kind of go with PTSD. Luckily, she said that drawing helped her out of this dark place in her life, and she estimated that she has produced 4,000 or more pieces of art, and she had sold or donated nearly all of them. She cooks, she gardens, she drives, she does her own hair and makeup, and she lives as normal of a life as she possibly can after everything that she went through. She also threw out the first pitch at a San Francisco Giants game in 1999. In 2023, she said that she's finally at a place in her life where she's happy. I'm just happy with life. I try to help others see through my eyes. You shouldn't give up hope. It's still a good life. There's so much out there. It's beautiful. It's not a matter of looking for it or making it happen. You just should accept happiness when it does come to you. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, give it a thumbs down. I don't really care. Subscribe if you're new. Comment down below videos you would like to see next. Let me know what you guys thought on this video in the comments down below. It was an insane case to research. I feel like some of you guys might have already heard about this story, or at least briefly, because back when it happened, it was a huge thing. Just like my last case, it was such a big thing. Everyone was talking about it, and rightfully so. This woman got her arms amputated by this crazy psychopath, not a doctor, and for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And Roxanne's murder could have 100% been avoided if the laws in California were a lot stricter like they are now. So anyways, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!